just want to start by thanking Nancy, because it's Nancy's team, Nancy and her team, that started this conference, and we asked if we can help keep it going, and so she's supported it for the last 7 years. So thank you, Nancy. So Liz, I'll turn over to you.
Sure. I'd like to welcome our panelists today. I'm Liz Seegart. I'm a healthcare journalist that primarily writes about aging, so I'm interested in everybody's stories. But please give me stories and not, well, never mind. With us today is Nancy LeaMond. She's Executive Vice President and Chief Advocacy and Engagement Officer at AARP. Neal Shah, CEO of CareYaya. David Moss, CEO of Care Daily. And Amy Schiffman, Principal of Aging Here. Nancy, Mary?
So Nancy, today's panel focuses on progress to support America's 48 million family caregivers. And I know you were a caregiver. How many in the audience are caregivers? Yeah, so a substantial number. Can you talk to us about AARP's efforts to elevate the need of family caregivers into the national conversation? I know you're really passionate about that topic.
Well, we are, and thanks for having this, and thanks for being here, everybody. I can see a lot of old friends, and I hope some new friends. And I say I can see you, for the first time since the conference started, I had cataract surgery, so now I can actually see you as I look at it. Excellent, another innovation that's been great for older Americans. We've worked on caregiving for a number of years. We'll probably talk more about that later, but we decided, based on the progress we had made in the public policy arena at the state and the federal levels, that 2024 was a really important year. And I think, in fact, if you look at what's happened over the last year, you can say that we did put family caregivers on the public policy map. That was the work of a lot of organizations. And if I can give a little shout out to our team, the AARP team across the country, we decided that the presidential election cycle was going to be an important one. And so we asked every single candidate for federal office this year where he or she stood on Social Security and family caregiving. And we did it for a couple of reasons. One was we wanted to hear the solutions, but second, we wanted to be sure to elevate the issue with every single person who was speaking to their constituency. And we got some very interesting insights, not the least of which is almost all public officials that are going to be in the Congress this year have been or have worked closely with family caregivers. So that was one thing we did. And second, as we looked across the political landscape, I didn't think I would actually last long enough to hear two presidential candidates talk about essentially long-term care. As you know, Vice President Harris proposed a home care benefit within Medicare, recognizing her own family caregiving experience. And President-elect Trump endorsed the credit for caring provision, which is a piece of legislation we've authored and supported for many years. So we think we made some progress, more to do, and not just in the public policy arena. As this panel will speak to, there is so much innovation needed in order to help family caregivers.
And you were just recognized by The Hill magazine, right?
Thank you, yes.
So speaking of the election, was caregiving a top issue for voters?
It was in the sense that about a quarter to 40% of family voters in the various battleground states identified as family caregivers. And if you asked them if they were more likely to support a candidate who addressed those issues, the answer was yes. But importantly, the family caregiver costs were so important as part of that kitchen table economics view that we know was dominant. There was no question. Somebody earlier mentioned older voters. 53% of the people who voted in this country were older voters, and the major issue for them, like other groups, was daily costs. And family caregivers spend on average $7,500 a year, so it resonated.
Yes, absolutely. So let's turn to Neal. Neal, you've just been recognized by LinkedIn as CareYaya, one of the top 20 startup companies in the United States. How about that? So,
Thanks, Mary.
and talk to us a little bit about the potential healthcare reform and deregulation, and how is that impacting innovation in the caregiving sector, particularly for platforms or CareYaya. And also you've seen a shift in the investor community and how they look at workforce as an issue now. So the election brought up a lot of these issues, right?
Yeah, I think so. And yeah, thanks, Mary, for the question, and thanks for the opportunity. I personally think, I've been in business for over 20 years prior as an investor, and I think that this is the biggest investment opportunity of our lifetime. There's and broadly beyond caregiving, I think just healthcare in general, it's a $4.5 trillion industry, 20% of our GDP. And I think now there's several signs pointing to the industry is completely broken and ripe for disruption. We're spending so much on care and yet getting the lowest life expectancy in any developed country. 75% of patients are unhappy with the healthcare system. I think you see so many signs, not to be morbid, but last week, the CEO of the largest healthcare company in the country got shot. And the majority reaction by people from social media was, glee and jokes about prior authorizations and claims denials. So I think you have a big shift now, which I think it creates a huge opportunity. If when you have a large industry that doesn't serve the people it's supposed to serve, I think we're going to see a huge consumerization in healthcare. And I think how that affects us and where we see a big opportunity is, I think, 3 buckets: who provides care, how care is delivered, and who pays for care. I think all those are going to shift. And I think as a result, the biggest companies 5 to 10 years from now are going to be startups who are able to innovate and build a new care system. So, to your point, we see there aren't enough healthcare workers or caregivers in America, and the existing system isn't going to solve it. So innovations like CareYaya are finding a new way to bring new workforces into providing care for the population. I think how care is delivered, right now we talk about it as just caregiving, but I think eventually even much more critical healthcare is going to start moving back into the home. I think you're going to have a shift away from hospitals into care delivery into the home. And if you study the example of what happened with Japan with the aging population in the 1990s, you had to figure out ways to get less skilled and less trained workers to deliver care into the home, just because there simply weren't enough doctors and the aging population wasn't going to go to hospitals to visit them. So I think that is a massive innovation opportunity. And then who pays for care? I think critically the insurance companies have messed up the entire system because it creates an incentive where the provider and the patient don't have the direct relationship. So I think there's going to be a huge shift to consumerization of healthcare, and I think that's going to be, I don't know exactly how it'll work out, whether or not Medicare or insurers pay people directly, self-directed vouchers, but I think something's going to have to shift along those. So I think all those create major innovation opportunities.
So let's make it interactive. Any thoughts about what he said?
Well, I think, I think there is no doubt that care is moving to the home, and the pressure on families as a result of that is going to increase dramatically. As we move over time, I think the question is going to be who pays, and important for your audience, particularly for entrepreneurs, who is going to pay for the technology as we move forward. So there is no question that there is focus, certainly in the public policy arena, in others as well, on workforce in a way there hasn't been before, paid and unpaid.
Neal, let me jump in with a follow-up question. There's increased bipartisan focus on reducing healthcare costs and administrative burden. How is CareYaya positioned to take advantage of this streamlining?
Yeah, I think, basically it's almost like the trends are moving in the direction of what we've been building. I think streamlining administrative costs is a great example. Traditional home care in the country is delivered by national franchisors with local franchisees, extremely bloated cost structure to the point where of every dollar you spend, less than 50 cents are going to the care worker. At CareYaya, currently we're deferring monetization, but if every dollar you spend, all of it's going to the care worker. But even at scale, maximum 1 or 2 cents might be to the organization. So I think, how does that happen? Using tech to streamline and massively lower administrative overhead. This industry has not incorporated tech, and I think there's a lot of cool tech innovation that's happening adjacent, that I'm not directly doing. But what I find is that no one's actually doing a tech-first care company, in that sense of like, okay, I'm bringing workforce through tech. So I think that's been kind of like an interesting opportunity. But yeah, I think that's a major, if the government, to your point, Nancy, if the government's going to start paying more for care, I don't think they're going to start paying $40 an hour for home care agencies and 15 is going to the care worker. I think the government's going to want to say, I am paying directly to the person providing it and a minimal overhead. So I'm almost kind of building CareYaya backwards in something that somebody in government would want to partner with. But thanks for the question.
Well, to Neal's point, David, elder care does often rely on multiple providers. They often don't communicate well with each other. Details slip through the cracks because the systems aren't integrated. So how can AI help better coordinate care? And I understand you have an announcement actually to make about that.
Yeah, I might talk about that.
Breaking news here, folks.
In a moment. Yeah, so so Neal's right. We have to have technologies because the trends are here. There are not enough people. This is a market that requires people. The technology needs to help people do what people do best. And it's not here to replace individuals. So we need to use technologies in homes to understand how people are doing, to offer those insights, to predict the health problems and get ahead of these issues. We need to stop focusing on just the patient or just the client or just this one person. It is about the whole family. We need to activate the family. It should be family-centric, not patient-centric. And technologies, and we call it an AI caregiver, it's an intelligence that can play a role. So at Care Daily, we're helping with professionals identify who to focus on across their population. We're helping families connect. And today, we actually, just as this panel started, a new press release hit. We're announcing that we have now won a large multi-million-dollar contract, multi-year contract funded by the country of Belgium to provide these sorts of technologies into thousands of homes in Belgium to enable professionals to help care for these people and keep them in their own homes longer and help families connect and play a vital role in care.
Congratulations on that. You heard it here first. David, talk a little bit more about the fragmentation issues when it comes to health and age tech and how AI can help not only the caregivers, but the providers, the health systems, and really anybody, family, friends, connect to create these solutions because often caregiving involves multiple conditions, multiple needs.
Fragmentation is one of the biggest problems to solve. And there's actually multiple layers of that. You have not only fragmented silos of data that need to be brought together and analyzed more holistically, we have, look at all the point solutions out there. There was a comment earlier about, there can only be so many point solutions in a home. What we need to do is bring them together to defragment those point solutions. And then families are distributed as well. We have multi-generational families, friends, and neighbors who are also fragmented. So it's both a technical problem to bring together these technologies, and it's a social problem to bring together people. And when you combine the two, there's a lot of magic that happens. We can look at the data coming in and around a person's life more holistically. And these products that come together to form these solutions end up increasing the value of the entire system. We become more predictive. We understand what's happening, and we can provide better insights to help care for these people. So I think that artificial intelligence solutions that's one of the key values they can bring is in understanding all this data. They already understand a bunch of languages. Why not understand a bunch of protocols and uniting data silos to process it in real time? It's real power.
Sounds ambitious. And, the thing is, though, Amy, all of these solutions have to be paid for. Medicare has to pay for it. Nancy mentioned earlier about payment. What do providers need to know about Medicare coverage for these technology solutions? And what are some of the challenges when it comes to trying to figure out how to even bill and code for this?
Yeah, this is a very interesting and complicated issue. And everybody in this room, I see some physician colleagues in the room. The idea that there are these CPT codes and these ICD-10 codes that at the end of every visit or experience or encounter have to be matched up, it's sort of an administrative cognitive stack that no one could possibly ever master. You know, there's 11,000 CPT codes, 8,000 HCPCS codes, and bajillions of ICD-10 codes that you have to all kind of match together in order to figure out what to do. But then what do you actually do? I mean, we hear about these amazing technologies, and your patients may come to you and say, hey, listen, I heard that I could maybe get a blood pressure cuff in my home. And you go, okay, sure. And they want to give you this information in sort of like a running data piece, which is like, so I'm going to send you my blood pressure like every 15 minutes times 1,000 patients. Yeah. So the provider side of technology in the home as it pertains to getting paid by Medicare is very complex. It has to involve a buy-in from the providers. They have to know that the billing codes exist. They have to be able to fit into their new administrative workflows how that is going to happen. They have to hope that the tail of the dog that is their electronic medical record is not driving the system to make it so impossible. They have to have 3 extra Excel spreadsheets, which at the end of every month they then parse through. It becomes almost impossible for most providers to figure out how to do this. And the types of technology that goes in the home is primarily of a monitoring type, right? Where it's like constantly taking your blood pressure, or you're checking your glucose. There's a lot of new things that are out there, but I've been involved from a startup perspective, you know, just assisting some folks from a consultative perspective in some remote therapy monitoring, and it is almost impossible to get the buy-in of the patient and the provider simultaneously than to get that through the workflow. In some ways, you're earning like minus $5 an hour for every, you know, for everything that you decide that you're going to do in that regard. It is complex. And I mean, I think we're on the verge of seeing something, but the way that Medicare pays is so complex that most physicians don't really have the bandwidth to figure it out.
So what's the solution then? What do we do, and how can we get, you know, Medicare to reimburse for some of this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's complicated because if you look across the physician fee schedule that comes out all the time, you know, once a year, and you look at it by the hour, right? If you took all the CPT codes that the physician, like if a physician is doing that work, and you aggregate all those codes by minutes and hours, Medicare is paying so that physicians are making approximately $200,000 a year. Like, it would be impossible with the amount of time with these time-based codes that physicians would be able to, you know, make more than $200,000. And I think one of the things that Medicare needs to consider doing is removing some of the time-based components to their coding, because if I have to spend 16 minutes talking about this and 12 and a half minutes talking about that and 31 minutes talking about this, I mean, it's like 27 hours in a day and 16 days in a week, and it's almost impossible to do. I think Medicare has to reconsider where their priorities are and if we want to continue with time-based billing. And this is on the original Medicare side. Keep in mind that Medicare Advantage has a whole slew of other ways of looking at things, and I focus a lot on original Medicare, living in Maryland specifically, and just that's been my personal focus, yeah.
So I want to turn back to Nancy for a minute, talking about the incoming legislative front. AARP is known for fighting for changes. Can you talk to me about some of the progress you've made, both here in Washington and on the state level, to deliver tangible changes for caregivers?
Sure. Interestingly, about 10 years ago, when we identified family caregiving as a really important issue, and we did it the old-fashioned way, a way that most national organizations never do planning, which is we looked at the calls we were getting from our members and what they were talking about. And it turned out they were all talking about caring for a loved one in the home. So we began to focus at the state level and started with a bill, some of you may be familiar with it, the CARE Act. It was a pretty simple concept. If you have to go into the hospital must identify the caregiver, and then when you leave, give the caregiver instructions. And when we first looked at it, we thought, gosh, are we ever going to get this passed? Are we ever going to be able to move it? And it turned out we now have it passed in 46 states. The first state to pass it was good old red Oklahoma. The second, my blue state, where I grew up, New Jersey. And the path to 46 obviously includes a lot of different ideologically framed states. But what we learned was that family caregiving was a bipartisan issue. And so we accelerated our work. And over the last 10 years, we've passed about 1,000 pieces of legislation in every single state dealing with a range of pieces of this challenge that we've talked about: telehealth, respite care, HCBS services, et cetera. We made very little progress at the federal level until a few years ago when Congress passed the RAISE Family Caregiver Strategy Act. HHS developed a national strategy with 500 plus recommendations. You always worry when something has 500 recommendations if it's designed to not do something or to actually do a lot. And we have made progress. But probably the most significant progress to date, and it speaks a little bit to Amy's observations, was an executive order passed by the Biden administration that directed CMS to take important steps. And I won't go through all of them, but the most recent one is the decision to pay providers to train family caregivers. And it was a very, very important development because for the first time it recognized this nexus, as Amy said, between paying for something, which turns out to be hugely important in the healthcare sector, and the deliverer, the provider. So we're very pleased with that. The next step is the Congress. We have 4 major pieces of legislation pending in Congress to deal with what we know caregivers need. They need more time, more money, and more support. So there's a Credit for Caring Act. We're engaged right now as Congress looks at the tax bill, provide a little bit of financial support to family caregivers. Second is to allow legislation to allow people to use their HSAs and FSAs for family caregiving type efforts. And then a couple related to reducing red tape, have the 1-800 phone line at HHS that talks to family caregivers, makes it easier for them to sign up on behalf of their loved ones. It's going to be, I think we got this sense from everybody on the panel, it's a long road, and it's a different road than we've been on historically, but there are steps, and I encourage folks to stay involved.
Are you optimistic that your advocacy priorities will keep moving forward?
We are. We think there's substantial bipartisan support for all of the initiatives I mentioned. Second, we know that most public officials are also family caregivers, and so there's the added advantage. Third, we know that their constituents care about this issue, and one of the things jolly advocacy groups like ours do is bring the faces and the voices of constituents to the members. But make no mistake, it's a complicated political environment, and anything that costs money is an even bigger challenge.
That's maybe the understatement of the morning. Neal, as we look ahead to 2025 and beyond, what do you see as some of the regulatory barriers critical to address to unlock the growth in this digital and healthcare caregiving space? And as an investor, and given your prior background, what makes this so compelling for investors to jump on as an opportunity?
Yeah, thanks. I think echoing a lot of what Nancy said, I think that a lot of government officials are experiencing these challenges themselves. I actually view it as everybody has good intentions. They just have completely different philosophies on how to fix the problem. And I think we're seeing a shift in political tide where less government, the better, give power back to the people, let kind of the consumer decide, which I think already goes in line with the healthcare trend of consumerization of care and healthcare. So I think, I love hearing about initiatives like paying to train family caregivers. I love the idea of people using HSAs. Medicare rolled out dementia guide program this year, which is the first time they're going to actually pay you for home-based caregivers. And if that works well, I would see that as a massive expansion opportunity of just directly paying for home-based care of older adults. So I think a lot of regulatory red tape is being rolled back, and it's just effectively let's just give money to people and see how they want to spend it. I think from an investment standpoint, I'd say one interesting thing I would recommend everybody in the audience is there's a great essay by Andreessen Horowitz put out called "The Biggest Company in the World," and I think it's I was thinking about that while we were talking on this panel. it's very interesting. They kind of lay out this 2030 roadmap of right now there is no big healthcare company that's top 5 in the world, and their vision is in the next 10 to 15 years, 1 or 2 of the biggest companies in the world will be a consumer health tech company. And interestingly, as we were talking, I was thinking their 2 pathways were these pathways that they described in terms of what David and I are building. Their one pathway was a company that owns the relationship with the consumer, brings the care force into the home, and then just rapidly innovates and figures out other ways to bring more and more care delivery in the home, and effectively creates a hospital and home type model where much healthcare is directly consumerized, and then figures out a way to bend the cost curve, and then navigates the changing payer dynamics. And then that was one path. And the other path of how to build the biggest consumer health tech company in the world was David's path of building the data and infrastructure layer that every other company plugs in on, and that becomes kind of the AWS of healthcare. And I think it's very interesting to kind of step back and think, how do you build a $1 trillion company? Why isn't there a $1 trillion, $2 trillion company in the healthcare space? It's the biggest sector in our economy. And I think it's a huge opportunity. So I think from an investment standpoint, I talked to a lot of, since we had a bunch of CNBC and Wall Street Journal news, a lot of big VCs have been reaching out. I think that Andreessen Horowitz and others in Silicon Valley have heavily backed the new administration. And I think one of their biggest things is they see healthcare as the last frontier of tech disruption. So there's going to be several unicorns coming out of the sector, I think, in the next 3 to 5 years. So it's a very exciting time to build.
So Neal, I want to weigh in on this. So Steve Jurvetson said, value creation comes from demographics, technology, and the regulatory environment. In your model with the CareYayas that you have, you've had doctors funding your company. You've had angels at hospitals like UCSF, where they put CareYaya up on their website. And I think your force of CareYayas can become technology ambassadors for other solutions. It's the most compelling. They're a little bit like the American Revolution, and they're going to go out and make changes happen. So I think they'd be interested in a lot of the ideas of the entrepreneurs in the room. But do you see the power in that workforce? And you said to me the other day that CareYaya is the difference between a taxi, which I tried to find yesterday, and an Uber, which you can always find. So talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. I think huge difference in the workforce. Traditional home-based care, given the way it's paid and given kind of how it's delivered, by companies keeping most of it, is unfortunately very low-wage work. So you have a home care workforce in the country that is not very tech-savvy, that is not going to be the front line of bringing tech into the home. We have now 25,000 plus college students at top universities who are aspiring to graduate school and future clinical careers, going into homes and taking care of people. These are today's 20-year-olds, 22-year-olds that are digitally native, very tech savvy. So I think that is a big barrier right now to bringing a lot of tech into the home is who's going to use it, the 84-year-old person living with dementia, or their 55-year-old son or daughter who's living somewhere else, or a young person who comes to help out and then implements and helps you manage. So I think that's a huge opportunity.
And I think they could be change agents for the legislative parts too, like the caregiver education support.
Yeah, I agree. I think young people are very politically active, always, kind of interested in driving change. And I think one of the biggest things we're seeing is how many people across the country that do our program are shocked at both kind of the challenges of aging at home, but also shocked at the quality of the home-based care industry. And I think it really inspires many of them to change their career trajectory. I think we hear from a lot of physicians that there aren't enough geriatric doctors, there aren't enough palliative care. No one's eagerly going into these fields. So I think many times inspiring people to go into these careers is very useful, and I think driving advocacy and change. So totally agree.
David, one of the other things that's driving change, obviously, is the increased use of AI. Can you give us some concrete examples, 1 or 2 examples of actually how this works?
Sure. Yeah. So first, Care Daily has an open AI platform. We use this to power other brands. So you're not going to necessarily see Care Daily as the brand. You'll see a much bigger brand than we are as the promoter of this. And the problem is simple. Everyone has different problems in their own homes. You have different lifestyles and houses and chronic conditions. You have different disabilities, cognitive disabilities. You have physical disabilities. This technology is not limited to a bunch of old people. This is accessible to everybody at all ages. And so in order to personalize the care in homes for everybody's different preferences and lifestyles and situations, we have to have menus of point solutions and things we can bring into the home to unite and personalize the care and unite their family and so on. So any large company really has to have a platform that will enable that vision. And they can either build it themselves, it's going to be tens of millions of dollars in maybe 10 years or more, or you can license it so we have an open, scalable, proven platform. And it's scientifically proven. So thank you to the NIA for the generous funding. One of the outcomes is that when we take our army of AI caregivers and we put it into homes across people of America who are caring for someone with dementia and Alzheimer's, the family caregivers, usually and unfairly an adult daughter, experiences significantly lowered anxiety and significantly improved sleep quality because it feels like there's somebody new in the home. It feels like there's somebody there. And so for the family, this is really impactful. People actually live longer. Both the person with dementia, but by the way, at UC Berkeley, our research partner, they showed that when the family caregiver is in better mental and physical health, the person with dementia lives 14 months longer on average. It's great. And it's because there are fewer health problems. For professionals, it's about understanding, who do I focus on today? Who do I prioritize? When I wake up and I come in today, what are the top 5 people I should focus on? And why? Can you explain that to me in plain English? Or French. In Belgium, what we're doing is, it's 3 of the largest home care agencies in Belgium that have come together and united into a federation that is now funded by the Belgian government to keep people in their own homes, because as people are getting older and moving into communities, it's bankrupting their system. So they have to have technologies to back up these professionals and enable them to identify, who do I focus on today and how do I get ahead of this problem? So these are some of the wonderful outcomes that are occurring because of AI.
Well, a lot of us hear AI and we immediately, the red flags go up about things like data privacy and, getting mom's social security information or something like that. What would you tell both providers and consumers about how AI is used and kind of the privacy safeguards that are in place?
I think people are right to feel a little concerned about the word AI, and people think it's going to take their jobs, it's going to eat their medicine and kick their dogs. I think there's 2 different views, really. For consumers, I like what Nat Finlay here is doing with Lifeguard, calling it, like, downplaying the technology. It's a lifeguard lookout system, I believe he calls it. So it's like, it's a little helper, and it's really about the people who are helping. So the technology is downplayed for the consumer. And then for the professionals, it's really about empowering their staff and enabling them to do the things that people are better at. Let's empower people and let these technologies take care of some of the menial tasks and looking at all the data. And I think that organizations who are evaluating AI solutions should look for solutions that are third-party validated, that are out there and proven. And I also think we need a larger conversation in general about the pillars of responsible AI and ethical AI for this market, because we are in the private homes of individuals and need to protect them and their privacy.
Thank you for that. Amy, Medicare, as much as we would like them to, kind of react in real time, they're not exactly known for being nimble. Can Medicare and CMS in general keep up with the proliferation of these new age tech ideas and the implementation?
Nope. I hate to anybody in CMS, I do apologize, because I know everyone's trying their very, very best, but things are moving in very rapid fashion. What I would say is this, is that every time a new code comes out, the way that trickles down to providers is it doesn't. I work in the world of, community physician providers as well as sort of a national level. I can tell you most providers couldn't tell you that there was a new caregiver code out there. Nope. Yeah. Wouldn't know. And in fact, as physicians, we call them qualified health professionals in the Medicare space, those who can bill Medicare, in order for us to learn about new codes, you have to be an active learner. You have to be willing to go out there and learn about it, and then receive that information and be willing to actually change how you do your work, your everyday work. Moreover, you have to understand that Medicare is also piecemeal. So, the original Medicare side is, oh, you did a social determinants of health screen. Here's $19. Oh, did you spend 12 and a half minutes doing it? Okay, super. Okay, so now you're going to take a few minutes and educate the caregivers. Did you do that for 20 minutes? And if so, did you document that well enough? I mean, it becomes a real burden. So as much as I love this idea, and in fact, within that sort of caregiver space, there's a ton of things called care management codes, which is in a nice sort of thick book of Medicare Learning Network knowledge. And there's a lot of codes out there that qualified health professionals can bill for doing A, B, C, and D, and then also allowing the tentacles of their practice and potentially third-party vendors to actually accomplish the billing for some of those codes. It is an enormous lift for many providers who, quite frankly, there's a huge tech stack involved with a lot of that. Right now, you got a new portal, you got to connect here, you've got to implement things, you've got to, learn how data moves around. There's an enormous lift. So even as simple as a caregiver code, who's going to do it? It doesn't pay what physicians make, so you can maybe offload that to somebody who doesn't make quite as much money. Perhaps there's a physical therapy group that wants to be doing it. But in order to communicate all of these codes, Medicare is going to have to make sure that everyone sees them, understands them, and then brings them forefront into the provider's sort of vision.
And what about entrepreneurs? What do they need to do to get their technology in front of CMS and get it approved?
And there are some specific codes you were going to mention to the entrepreneurs.
Sure. So there are a few codes, and as you mentioned, there are some caregiver codes that are, and I don't need to tell you 994, whatever they are, but you can see me afterwards. I'd be happy to share them with you. And yeah, we can play like scripts, like, sort of spelling bee of CPT codes. But there are codes that are out there right now that are not only just for caregivers, for teaching caregivers. This is face-to-face time for the patient doesn't have to be present. You're actually able to have one-on-one time with the caregivers themselves. Moreover, there's some navigation codes that are out. I'm part of a stealth startup that's sort of looking at some of this, that's trying to figure out how can we use these new navigation codes, which also do not need to have the patient present in order to assist caregivers. The problem always is, though, is that a physician, a nurse practitioner, or a PA has to open those codes with an extensive visit. And that is often a barrier to patients and their families, because they're like, but I already have a doctor. Why do I need to now get yet another exam, another this, when data is sparse and they have to retell their story a lot of times. So I think there's something to be said for understanding there's new navigation codes, there's new caregiver codes. The chronic care management codes do support caregivers. The RPM, the remote physiologic monitoring, the remote therapy monitoring support caregivers. There's a whole family of codes that are out there that people have to become very facile in. And those are really outside of the general practice of medicine. I hope that was helpful.
So, Nancy, I want to conclude by asking you about how the folks in this room, entrepreneurs and investors, can ensure they're meeting the needs of family caregivers.
Well, what's that expression? If you're a hammer, everything you see is a nail. If you're an advocate, everything you see are potential activists. So I want to make a quick pitch that if any of you think Medicare or health insurance or health delivery system is part of the technology future, you should engage in various debates, whether it's through us, happy to have you work with us, but with others. The public policy arena is hugely important and daunting. I thought I was already depressed enough about the pace of change, but Amy's almost sent me over the edge.
I'm here for you. I'm a doctor.
But I knew Medicare was complicated for individuals, and you add to that the complication for providers. I was joking recently that I think Medicare should be on the Mensa test to determine kind of mental acuity. But beyond that, technology is hugely important for reasons that have been documented in the conversation. But technology also, from the consumer point of view, has to be easy to use, relatively inexpensive, and not duplicative. You cannot imagine, we're a destination of choice for folks working on various technologies, and you can't imagine the number of entrepreneurs working on essentially the same application. I go back years ago, 10 years ago, my husband was diagnosed with ALS. We cared for him in the home for the 5 years he lived, and Mary was nice enough to introduce me to a number of entrepreneurs. And I started to get these devices to test. And you know that thing that clips on your finger that's plastic that costs $10 and measures oxygen? I'd been using that, and then I got 5 other instruments that were more complicated, more expensive, and may have told me more information, but it was information I didn't need as a family caregiver. And I always kind of keep that in the back of my mind. And I think particularly when we talk about the future of reimbursement in healthcare, whether it's private insurance or public insurance, we know it is going to be a very tight system. So that's my final word. But also to thank everybody for the work you are all doing in this piece of the care delivery system we call the family caregiver. It is the biggest, now most unrecognized and now somewhat recognized provider group in the healthcare system, and we need to keep moving forward. And thank you all for your leadership.
Oh, it's always fun to work with Nancy, and it's always fun to see people like Todd moving things so fast, and later you'll hear from Greg in New York and see that. So it's the energy of the entrepreneurs and their drive and their determination, and it's just fuels a lot. And thank you for pointing us in this direction. So Liz, great conversation. Any final thoughts?
I'd just like to hear very quickly from each of the panelists, what is the one key piece of either legislation or news that you'd like to see come out regarding caregiving in the coming year? If you can give it to me in one word, let's just go right down the line. Nancy?
Oh, I think focus on acknowledging the caregiver and providing support, financial support, either for the technology or the intervention or the individual.
Neal?
I would like to see vouchers given to people for consumer-directed care. I think a lot of the comments that Nancy and Amy made are really telling. Like, I don't deal with Medicare. I don't deal with these codes. Why? Because if you're innovating and you get bogged down in this, you're going to mess up the product. You deal directly with people and what they want, and that's how you build cool things. And I've noticed a lot of the startups in the care economy that get bogged down in that early mess up the product because ultimately the person doesn't want what you built for Medicare. So I'd like to just get power back to the people. Medicare should just start writing checks and say, you pay for a dementia drug or you pay for caregivers, you decide. So I think that's the biggest innovation I'd like to see.
David?
I'm seeing a common theme. I agree on the finances, interesting financial structures in Europe there that we tapped into. We need things like that here. And I've been excited recently about how these same technologies we're creating to help people live independently as they age apply to young people with disabilities. Mm-hmm. And there are real financial incentives there as well.
Amy?
Yeah, I agree with you guys. However, from a provider perspective, we live and breathe in the provider space, and whatever Medicare can and cannot pay for, I think it's really important that families and caregivers know what those things are. So I would say that the word that I would give you would be education.
Okay. Something to go home with. Thank you all.
So, wonderful panel. Great conversation. Thank you all for being with us.